I still remember the exact smell of that afternoon, a heavy mix of dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic that had held me down. It was the day I stayed after school to finish a history project, long after most students had gone home, and the hallways had settled into that eerie silence that only an empty building could create. I never liked being in the school when it was quiet. The place felt different, hollow in a way that felt too personal, as if the walls listened more closely to anyone else's voice. But I told myself staying late was fine. Nothing bad happens in the classroom, I thought. Nothing that isn't already in your head. The history room was on the third floor, tucked into a corner that rarely got sunlight. A single window faced a brick wall, giving everything inside a permanent dimness no matter the time of day. I sat at my desk scrolling through old articles, trying to focus, trying not to think about how the silence pressed against the back of my head. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering from time to time in that way that makes your eyes feel strange even when you're not tired. I don't know what made me notice the paper at first. It wasn't on my desk. It wasn't on the teacher's table. It wasn't anywhere someone might naturally leave something behind. It was curled at the edge of the room, right up against the baseboard, as if it had been deliberately pushed for out of sight. I only noticed because I dropped my pen and it rolled farther than it should have, bumping gently into the folded corner of that sheet. It looked like an ordinary sheet lying over the page. Nothing unusual except for the fact that the writing on it was a deep reddish brown instead of ink. At first I thought it was paint. Art students were always passing from different classrooms. Maybe someone wiped the brush on it. Maybe it was part of a project. But when I picked it up, the texture was gone. The strokes had dried stiff, uneven, and slightly raised on the page. And the color was unmistakable once I let myself acknowledge it. Whatever had been used to write those words had once been used. The message was short, a single sentence, shaky and uneven, like someone had written it while their hands moved. Do not let him follow you home. The chill sank into me so deeply that for a moment I forgot how to breathe. I scanned the room, half expecting someone to step out from behind the desk, even though I'd swear I was alone. My heartbeat thudded loudly in my ears, drowning out the soft hum of the lights. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, an edgy joke someone left a mess with whoever stayed late. But the way the letters were jagged, the way the strokes darkened at the end of each word, as if the writer pressed harder to maintain the tone, it didn't feel like a joke. I placed the paper on my desk and tried to go back to my project, but every few seconds I found myself glancing toward the door. I couldn't shake the idea that someone might be standing just outside, waiting. I kept telling myself I was being dramatic. Nothing was happening. Nothing had happened. But fear has a way of drilling into you even when there's no reason for it. Or maybe there was a reason, and I just didn't understand it. About 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, heavy, not the quick, random tapping of someone walking by. These were paced, deliberate steps. They stopped right outside the history room door. My body froze. I waited for the door to open, or a knock, or something to indicate a normal person was out there. But the silence returned, thick and suffocating. And I finally forced myself to peek through the small window in the door. The hallway was empty. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I imagined footsteps. Stress plays tricks on your senses. But when I sat back down, I noticed something that made my skin crawl all over again. The paper had moved. Not far, just rotated slightly, as if someone had turned it while I was at the door. I told myself maybe I bumped the desk earlier. Maybe my elbow brushed it, but I hadn't touched my seat when I stood up. Something inside me broke down. I packed my things as quickly as I could, shoving my laptop and books into my bag and shaking my head. I didn't want to look at the paper again, but leaving it there felt wrong, like abandoning a woman who wasn't supposed to be. So with a knot tightening in my stomach, I folded it and slipped it into my notebook. The hallways felt more dark. Every shadow looked creepy. Every corner felt occupied by something just beyond sight. I could hear my footsteps echoing far more loudly than I should have. By the time I reached the school gate, I was practically speedwalking, gripping my backpack straps so tightly my feet would hurt. The walk home was only 10 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I checked over my shoulder again and again, convinced someone was behind me even though I never saw anyone. When I reached my house, I shut the door quickly and locked it. Only then did I let myself breathe normally. I tried to calm down. I opened my notebook to look at the page again, hoping that with the safety of home around me, it would seem less frightening. But something else had been added. Under the original sentence, in the same dry reddish stroke, was another line. Shorter, more urgent. was already inside. My breath stuttered. The house was silent, but not the comfortable kind of silent. It was the kind that wraps itself around your spine. My back toward the living room, scanning every doorway, every corner, every shadow. I told myself it was impossible. No one had followed me. I locked the doors. The windows were closed, but the message sat in my trembling hand. Someone had known I would take the paper. Someone had known I would bring it home. I didn't see or hear anything like that, but I didn't sleep either. Every creak in the house felt like a footstep. Every shift of air felt like someone passing behind me. I stayed awake until morning, waiting for something to appear, something to confirm or deny the rumor. Nothing did, but the paper did something to my work. The message changed again. Not rewritten, not scribbled over. The dry strokes were the same, but the words had rearranged themselves into a final line, one that made my hands go cold as ice. I shouldn't have ignored it. And below that, faint but unmistakable, was a fresh smear of red at the bottom edge of the paper. Still slightly tacky, as if whatever left it hadn't been going for long. I remember the day I found the second paper, because it was supposed to be a normal morning, the kind you forget as soon as it passed. I had slept barely 2 hours the night before, still shaken by what happened to a friend who told me about a blood-written message from a friend. He told me he felt watched afterwards, followed by something he never saw. At the time, I thought exhaustion had gotten to him. His eyes looked sunken, his hands trembled when he tried to explain. But everything he said replayed in my head long after he left. And I had the uneasy feeling that his fear had settled into his trust and refused to be shaken off. So when I walked into the school library that morning, still unsettled and trying to distract myself, the last thing I wanted was anything to scream. I just wanted a quiet place to breathe and convince myself that his experience had nothing to do with it. The library was always calm at that hour, shelves towering above narrow aisles, the faint hum of the old window, the soft scratch of the librarian's pen as she marked the pages. The air carried that warm paper smell that usually took my hand. But that day, the silence felt heavy, as if I had stepped into a space holding its breath. I headed to the far corner, where a small study table sat on a two tall shelves. It was my usual spot, tucked away but open enough to feel safe. I set my bag down, pulled out my textbook, and tried to focus on the page in front of me. For a moment, nothing felt out of place. The world was boring, predictable, exactly how I needed it to be. Then I noticed the corner of a folded sheet sticking out from beneath one of the books, already on the table. At first I assumed someone had left a note and forgotten the assignment. Students used the library all the time. It was normal for things to be left behind. But something inside me tightened, a faint warning spreading through my chest in a slow, cold wave. I pulled the paper through. It was the same type of lined notebook sheet my friend had described. Same uneven strokes, same deep reddish color that wasn't open. The writing looked rough, like someone had dragged something thick and sticky across the page as they tried to finish before getting it. The letters wavered slightly, but the words were clear. Do not search for the source. My mouth was dry. I looked around the library, half expecting someone to be watching me from the floor. But the librarian was still at her desk, her head down, her pen moving steadily. A few students sat scattered around the room, none of them looking in my direction. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering softly the way old bulbs from the moon. I stared at the message, my fingers growing colder the longer I held it. Part of me wanted to put it back and pretend I never saw it. Another part demanded I run to my friend and show him, just to prove that whatever he experienced wasn't his imagination. But a deeper, quieter part whispered that neither of those options would change anything. I unfolded the second half of the paper. The handwriting was smaller here, the lines thinner, as if the writer had run out of whatever they used and had to scrape the last of it to finish the message. Someone else already looked. He didn't make it home. A faint ringing filled my ears. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breathing steady. It was too close to what my friend had warned me about. Too similar. Too deliberate. As if whoever, or whatever, wrote the message knew exactly what I had been told the day before. I folded the paper and slipped it into my notebook. I didn't want to leave it there like a trap waiting for someone else. I didn't know why, but taking it felt like the only thing I could do, even though I felt a wave of dread as soon as it disappeared into my bag. I packed my things and left the library, trying to tell myself that it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone overheard my friend talking. Maybe it was a sick joke, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone walked behind me as I exited the room. even though the library doors didn't make a sound, and I didn't hear footsteps. Still, the sensation of being followed clung to me like static. The rest of the school day passed me. The teachers talked, the students laughed, the world moved around me, but it felt like I was behind a pane of glass watching everything from a distance. My mind kept circling back to the page. Do not search for the source. Someone else already did. You didn't make it home. The words repeated like a pulse. When the final bell rang, I walked home the long way, taking a route I normally hated because of the foolish. I wanted space to think, but being alone with my thoughts only made everything worse. Every car passing behind me made me tense. Every faint echo of footsteps made me turn. Every shadow from trees or streetlights made my heart beat spike. When I reached my house, I locked the door quickly and checked the windows. Nothing seemed disturbed. Nothing seemed wrong. I took the paper back out, hoping the daylight would make it feel harmless. But the message had changed. Not rewritten, shifted. The strokes were the same, but the words had rearranged themselves into a new sentence. You already started searching. My hand trembled. I hadn't searched for anything, not intentionally. All I did was pick up the message. All I did was think about it. But maybe that was all it took. Maybe that counted. Maybe the warning was less about action and more about attention. I set the paper down on my desk and backed away from it. My pulse thudded against my ribs. The room felt tight, the air too still. I tried to distract myself, turning on the light, the fan, the TV, anything to clear the noise. But even with all of it running, I could feel something beneath the sound, something quiet and purposeful, as if the house had developed a pulse of its own. Hours passed like that. I couldn't study. I couldn't sit still. I kept checking the corners of my room, the hallway, the space under the door. Every so often, boards in the hallway creaked, soft and deliberate, and no one else was home. When I finally forced myself to check the paper again, a new line had appeared at the bottom, faint and thin, as if written with the last bit of whatever substance the letter had. Stop now. That was all. 2 words. Soft but firm. I didn't touch the paper again. I didn't want to, but even from across the room, I kept glancing at it, expecting it to shift, to rewrite, to read something new onto the surface. It didn't. Not then. But late that night, just when exhaustion finally pulled me towards sleep, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. The paper sliding a few centimeters across the desk, as if nudged by a hand I couldn't see. In the morning, one more line had been added. You think you're safe until you stop. And below it, the strokes darker than the others. He's already watching me. I don't know why I agreed to clean the classroom alone that afternoon. Maybe because the teacher trusted me, or maybe because I didn't want to go home. The house had felt strange lately, as if the air inside carried someone else's breath. Staying behind at school felt safer, even if the hallways were nearly empty and the sun was already sinking behind the football building. The classroom was warm and still, the kind of heavy silence that settles after everyone leaves the room. Desks were scattered at odd angles, chairs pushed back hastily, loose worksheets fluttering in the faint breeze seeping from the back window. The fluorescent light above me buzzed with a low, pulsing hum that made the room feel alive in an uncomfortable way. I moved from desk to desk, stacking papers, tossing trash, trying not to think about the 2 stories I had already heard from students in other classes. Rumors about blood-written notes appearing where no one should have been, warnings that shifted when no one was watching, messages that didn't behave like anything should be true. I told myself those were just exaggerations, fear spiraling into fiction. But the longer I stayed in that room, the more the stories stirred in the back of my mind like dust catching my breath. It was when I bent down to pick up a fallen worksheet that I saw it, half hidden under the metal leg of the desk in the back wall. A single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded once, stained faintly along the edges with a reddish brown that instantly tightened the surface. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared at the edge peeking out from the dust, hoping I was wrong, hoping it was just a marker that had bled through or spilled paint from my folder. But something about the way it lay there, almost placed but not quite, made my fingers tingle. I forced myself to slide it through. The front of the page was blank, but it felt stiff, textured in a way paper should. I unfolded it slowly, breath tight in my throat. The moment the inside revealed itself, the cold pressure settled on my shoulders. The handwriting was jagged, uneven. Stroke pressure shifted with a rhythmic panic between, and the color, deep, dried, unmistakably organic, formed a message across the center of the sheet. Do not clean the last desk. My heart raced. I turned instinctively toward the back of the classroom. That desk, old, slightly warped, legs rusted near the bottom, sat alone in the far corner. No one ever used it. The teacher always said it was unstable and needed repair, but for some reason it was never removed. Students avoided it without knowing why. Until that moment, it was just a forgotten piece of furniture. Now it felt like a present. I swallowed hard and looked back at the message. The second line had been added beneath the first, thinner and shakier than the right. I waited there once. A cold sweat crawled up my spine. I folded the paper halfway, suddenly wanting to drop it, shove it back under the desk leg, and leave the room without looking again. But my hands wouldn't move. Something about the warning rooted me in place, as if reading it bound me to whatever it might be. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't colder, exactly, but heavier, as if something unseen was moving closer. A buzzing light filtered overhead, casting the room into brief, stuttering darkness. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I told myself it was a prank, an illusion, a trick someone played on me. But even as I thought it, my eyes kept drifting towards the last desk, its shadow stretching longer than it took past the polished floor. The rational part of my mind screamed to leave the room, to get help, to do anything other than walk closer. But curiosity has a way of trapping you, and fear pushes you toward the very thing you want to avoid, because your mind needs to see it, to confirm or deny its danger. I stepped toward the desk. Each footstep echoed faintly. The room seemed narrower than before, the walls inching inward, squeezing the air around me. My pulse thudded loudly in my ears. When I reached the desk, I paused, staring at it like it might react. The surface was covered in scratches, not random markings, but long, dragging lines carved deeply into the wood. Lines that looked like someone had scraped them with something sharper than a pencil or dull than a knife. Some marks overlapped. Some were fresh enough that tiny splinters still curled outward from the wood. I reached out slowly, brushing the surface with my fingertips. The wood was cold, too cold, as if it hadn't absorbed any warmth from the room. A faint sound crackled behind me. Paper shifted. I turned sharply. The note I had folded now lay completely open on the floor, even though I hadn't dropped it. The handwriting looked darker, bolder, as though something had traced over it while my back was turned. The new line now stretched beneath the others. Do not stand where I stood. My breath hitched. I looked down at my feet and realized I was standing exactly behind the last desk. The same place someone would stand if they approached a student who sat there. The same place an observer would stand, or a follower. A sharp jolt of fear shot through my chest. I stepped back instinctively, bumping into the desk behind me. The wooden legs squeaked against the floor, the sound far too loud for anything. My pulse spiked and tightened, burning pressure spreading from my chest. I bent down slowly, gripping the blood-written page with trembling fingers. The surface felt warm now, as if absorbing heat from something unseen. I wanted to fold it, hide it, destroy it, anything to stop it from changing. But the moment I lifted it, the letters twisted. Not rewritten, not smudged, shifted. The sentence rearranged itself into a new meaning, the strokes stretching and shrinking in unnatural patterns as the words formed between them. He was close. The room's silence thickened. Not empty, waiting. I didn't think. I bolted for the door, nearly tripping over a chair leg as I sprinted. My hands shook so violently I struggled to grip the door. When it finally turned, I stumbled into the hallway, gasping, the echo of the classroom door slamming behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the courtyard. Even then, I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced someone would step out of the doorway behind me. No one did. When I finally made it home, I laid the paper on my desk, telling myself I wouldn't look at it again until morning. But curiosity clawed at me. I checked it every hour. For a while, nothing changed. Then, a little after midnight, a faint scrape echoed from my desk. I froze. The paper had moved 3 centimeters toward the edge. The letters were shifting again, stretching slowly, painfully, as if written by invisible hands dragging across the page. A new line appeared at the bottom, thin and almost delicate. He sat at that desk for a reason. More strokes formed beneath it, thicker, darker, deliberate. And now he knows he noticed. I didn't plan on staying late that day. It was supposed to be a normal practice, light drills, quick laps, small talk with teammates, and then home in time for dinner. But the coach asked me to help lock up the equipment room, because the janitor had gone home. Everyone else left quickly, laughing and chatting in groups that faded down the hallway. I stayed behind, dragging my feet. feeling that strange hollowness that had been building in me ever since rumors about blood-written paper started circulating around the street. People whispered about messages that weren't there before, warnings that shifted, notes that didn't behave like notes. 3 different students had talked about it in hushed voices, each one insisting on being broken. And even though I told myself I was rational enough not to buy into anything like that, tight enemies had been sitting under my ribs for days. The locker room was quieter than usual, the kind of silence that swallows footsteps. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, pale and cold. The metal lockers stretched in long, narrow rows, and the smell of detergent mixed with faint traces of sweat coming from the air. It shouldn't have felt unnerving, but the emptiness made the place seem unfamiliar, as if I had walked into an abandoned building instead of the same room that changed from every day. I finished stacking the equipment, closed the supply cabinet, and reached for my bag. That's when I saw it, the corner of a lined notebook sheet sticking out from the blanket door of my locker. It was folded once, the edges slightly furrowed. Nothing unusual at first glance. People sometimes left notes or among them, but the moment I touched it, a cold prickle ran across my skin. The paper felt stiff, the surface uneven. I unfolded it slowly. The first line was written in that same deep reddish brown and I only heard the scratch second. A dried, textured color that doesn't hurt. My stomach tightened. Do not open the unlocker. My eyes drifted to the far side of the room, the last locker in the way. Locker 117. No one used it. The hinge had been rusted for years, and the door sat slightly crooked, permanently hacked. I always walked past it without thinking. It was just another broken thing on campus that no one bothered to fix. I looked back at the paper. The second line, smaller and uneven, stretched beneath the book. I waited there earlier. My breath caught. I swallowed hard and tried to shake off the feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe someone was messing with me. Maybe the whole thing was an elaborate joke spreading around the street. But whoever wrote this had slipped it directly into my locker. They knew I'd be alone. They knew I would find it. The air felt heavier, each breath shallow. I told myself to ignore it, to grab my bag and walk out without looking back. But my eyes kept drifting to the locker of 117. Its tilted door seemed to have shifted slightly, as though pushed from the inside. A thin shadow traced the floor beneath it, darker than I remembered. I tried to focus on wrapping the cloth. The draft, my imagination, the leftover tension from hearing too many strange stories. But the silence was too thick and the room too still. I could practically hear my own pulse echoing out from the door. I folded the note quickly and shoved it into my pocket. The paper felt warm now, as though reacting to my touch. The sensation made my hands tremble. I stepped toward the exit, determined to leave. Halfway across the room, a hollow clank echoed behind me. I froze. Another clank. Slow, soft, as if fingers tapped lightly against the metal. The sound came from far away. From the end. From locker 117. My breath stuttered. I didn't want to look. Every part of my body told me to keep walking. To get out. But fear has a way of pulling your eyes exactly when you think it's way. I turned my head. The locker door had opened another inch. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. The silence thickened, stretching each second into something long and suffocating. I felt the cold metal of the exit handle under my palm, but my feet were rooted to the floor. Then something made the smallest scrape from inside the locker. Nothing dramatic, just a shift, a faint, careful movement, like someone adjusting their weight in a cramped space. The hairs on my arms stood straight. I forced myself to back away slowly. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped my bag. My eyes never left the locker. It stood perfectly still, its crooked door slightly ajar, shadowed and silent as if it had never moved at all. I reached the hallway and slipped out, heart pounding. The hallway lights flickered overhead, casting faint, repeating shadows on the floor. I walked fast, but kept turning back, convinced something would step through the locker room doorway. Nothing did. Once home, I went straight to my room and pulled the note from my pocket. I unfolded it on my desk. For a moment, it looked exactly like the first. Then, slowly, the letters began to shift. The strokes stretched, thinned, rearranged themselves with agonizing slowness until a new line appeared beneath the original line. He knows you heard him. My chest tightened. I stepped back instinctively, watching as another faint line came up the bottom. This one looked rushed, the strokes uneven and nearly fading into the paper. Do not return there alone. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the note, unable to look away. felt smaller, the air too still. My gaze kept flicking to the corners, expecting something to emerge from the shadow. Hours passed like that. The paper lay unmoving, but the feeling of being watched only strengthened. When the clock reached midnight, a faint rustle broke the silence. The note slid an inch across my desk. I froze. The air felt charged, as though the room held its breath. Then the letters began shifting again, faster this time, almost frantic. The strokes twisted, pulling into a final moment of making it seem better. I found a new lock. The second, darker line formed slowly underneath. Each letter dragged with heavy, deliberate colors. Yours. I didn't think anything strange would happen during my walk in. That route had become routine for years. Same narrow road, same row of small shops, same dusty bus stop where students sat waiting for their ride. Nothing about it ever changed, except maybe the weather or the noise from passing motorcycles. But the afternoon had happened. The road seemed too quiet, the air too still, as if the whole neighborhood was holding itself still. I had stayed late after school for a group project, though everyone else left early. I didn't mind working alone. The classroom felt calmer without the noise, and it gave me space to think. But leaving the school grounds after sunset always felt different. The shadows grew long and stretched across the pavement, the breeze turned cooler, and the usual chatter of students faded to a quiet, uneasy routine. As I approached the bus stop, the streetlights flickered on one by one. A few people lingered nearby, the shopkeeper closing his shutters, a woman talking on her phone, a small group of students waiting for a bus that was running unusually late. Everything seemed normal now, until I noticed the folded sheet of lined paper sitting on the metal bench. It wasn't mine. It wasn't crumpled like something someone had tossed. It was placed neatly, carefully, as if someone expected a specific person to find it. The edges were slightly curled, the center stained faintly with a brownish tint that made me stand tight. I felt that same prickling sensation I had come to recognize from the stories others had told. The unmistakable feeling that I shouldn't touch it. But curiosity has a way of cutting through fear. I sat down slowly, pretending not to notice the paper, but my mind focused on it completely. The bench was cold under my hands, the metal slightly damp and uneven. The streetlights hung softly. After a moment, I reached for the paper. The texture told me everything. Rigid, uneven, slightly raised where the strokes had dried. I unfolded it with stiff fingers. The words stretched across the center in that same deep, dried color that didn't belong to any human being. The handwriting was slanted, hurried, like someone had written it while watching their surroundings carefully. Do not stand too close to the road. I glanced up immediately, half expecting someone across the street to be watching me. But nothing stood out. Just dim lights, distant cars, and the soft murmur of traffic. The other students waiting nearby didn't seem to notice anything strange. I looked back at the message. Another line had been added beneath the first, thinner and more uneven. He waits beside passing cars. My chest tightened. I folded the paper instinctively, but my hands shook as I placed it in my lap. My foot tapped uncontrollably against the concrete ground. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone wanted to scare students. Maybe it was connected to the other warnings people had talked about. But the more I thought, the less my reasoning mattered. Something about the message hit me deeper than the others I had heard about. This one felt immediate. Close. I scooted back on the bench, farther from the cold. The road suddenly felt too exposed, too vulnerable. Each passing vehicle stirred a brief breeze, carrying dust and a faint smell of exhaust. The headlights flickered across the pavement in all night, shifting beams. A bus passed by without stopping, stirring the air with a low wind. As it went, a figure-shaped shadow flickered along the pavement for barely half a second. Long, thin, stretched unnaturally, like it didn't belong to the vehicle or anyone nearby. I blinked hard. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was the angle of the headlights. Maybe I was already too influenced by the paper. I looked down at the note again. The handwriting had shifted. Not rewritten, shifted. The words realigned themselves into a new, chilling sentence. He stands closest when you look away. I snapped my gaze up, breath catching in my throat. My eyes darted from the road to the alley beside the shop, then to the dimly lit footpath leading to the river. Nothing moved. No one stepped closer, but the air felt tight, pressing against my ribs as though something unseen had narrowed the space around me. The other students chatted quietly. None of them reacted. None of them noticed anything wrong. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something lurked just beyond my peripheral vision, waiting for the right moment when I wasn't watching. I gripped the paper tightly and forced myself to stay alert. Minutes passed. A car rolled by slowly, its tires crunching against gravel. For the briefest moment, as it passed in front of me, I saw the outline of a face reflected in the window, a blurry, elongated shape, watching the bus stop from a distance too close for comfort. My breath stilled. The reflection vanished when the car moved on. The students near me didn't react. Their conversation continued, light and careless, as if nothing had happened. I wondered if I was the only one who could see these things, or if the paper itself made me notice them. The note trembled slightly in my hand. When I looked down again, a new line had appeared, faint and barely formed. He moved closer when the bus passed. My pulse raced. I crumpled the paper halfway, unable to stop staring at it even as fear clawed at my throat. I wanted to leave, to walk away from the bus stop completely, to hide somewhere crowded and bright. But the road home was long, and I didn't want to take it alone. The air grew colder. A breeze brushed past my ankle, soft but deliberate, like the faint movement of fabric. I looked down sharply. Nothing was there. The distant sound of a bus engine broke the stillness. The headlights approached from the far end of the road, glowing faintly in the gathering darkness. The other students stepped forward instinctively, preparing to board. I stayed seated, gripping the note tightly. Something in my gut screamed not to move. The bus slowed as it neared the stop, engine rumbling in heavy, low vibrations that buzzed through the bench. I watched carefully, refusing to look away from the road. Just as the bus tires screeched softly against the pavement, I saw it. A figure-shaped distortion in the headlights. Not a person, not a shadow. Something between the two, standing just at the edge of the road where I had walked minutes earlier. It didn't move. It didn't shift. It simply existed, barely visible, like a shape waiting for someone to take one step too close. My breath caught painfully. The bus doors opened. Students climbed inside. I stood slowly but kept distance between myself and the road. I didn't want to get near that area. Not anymore. When I boarded and found a seat near the back, I looked down at the note one last time. A final line had formed at the bottom, strokes darker than before, as if pressed firmly into the page. He followed the one who ignored the first warning. Another, smaller line appeared beneath it, almost delicate in comparison. And he noticed you were next. I still remember the day I walked into the school computer lab before anyone else. It was early morning, the kind of morning where everything feels strangely muted, like the air hasn't fully woken up yet. I only went that early because our assignment deadline was creeping up on me, and I needed the quiet. But the quiet I found there wasn't comforting. It was the kind of quiet that feels like someone has already been in the room, left in a hurry, and didn't want you to notice. The lights flickered once when I turned them on, revealing rows of computers that looked almost abandoned. My seat was the second row, fifth computer. I had used it every day that week, mostly because it faced the window and I liked watching the courtyard when I got stuck on something. But that morning, before I even sat down, I saw the paper. It was placed directly on the keyboard, a single sheet, slightly curled at the edges as if it had been held too tightly. And across the top half, smeared unevenly like someone used their fingertip instead of a pen, were faint reddish marks. Not bright, not wet, just dull, dry streaks that formed crooked lines. No letters, not a message. Just streaks that looked like someone trying to write but unable to decide what they wanted to say. I didn't touch it at first. Something about it made me hesitate, like it belonged to a moment I wasn't supposed to disturb. The streaks looked almost like rust, but too uneven. It crossed my mind briefly that it could be blood, but the idea felt too extreme for school, so I tried to brush it off. Still, the shape of the streaks made me uncomfortable. They looked deliberate. Not an accident. Not something spilled. More like someone had dragged their finger across the page again and again, trying to get something out. When I finally lifted it, the back was clean. No writing. No name. Just the front, with those marks. I placed it beside the keyboard and tried to start my assignment, but my eyes kept drifting back to the paper. I thought about throwing it away, but something held me back. It felt wrong to just dismiss it, so I left it there. Classes went on as usual. For a few hours, the weird feeling faded. But when I returned for the afternoon lab period, the paper was gone. I assumed a teacher had thrown it out. I didn't think about it again until the next morning, when I found another sheet waiting for me. This one was different. The marks were darker, though still completely dry, and this time they weren't random streaks. They formed shapes. Not letters, not words, but shapes that looked like someone had tried to outline something, but didn't have the steady hand to make it clear. I traced the pattern in my mind, trying to understand it, but it only made the discomfort worse. It reminded me of someone circling an area on a map, but the circle was broken, incomplete, repeated several times like the person's hand shook each attempt. Again, I left it alone. I didn't tell anyone. It felt too strange to explain, like I'd sound dramatic over nothing. But by the third morning, when a new sheet appeared, I couldn't pretend it was nothing anymore. This one had no shapes, no lines, just a single long streak that cut across the page diagonally, almost perfectly straight. That bothered me more than the unclear ones. The straightness of it felt controlled, intentional, as if whoever left it wanted me to notice the difference. I kept staring at the door that morning, expecting someone to walk in and claim it. But no one did. Everyone acted normal, talking about assignments and weekend plans. And I sat there, pretending to care, all while that silent sheet of paper pressed into the edge of my thoughts. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone in the early hours slipping into the computer lab, placing the paper, and walking away. Someone who knew exactly where I sat, what computer I used, what time I arrived. Someone who had chosen me. The fourth paper broke the pattern completely. Instead of using a keyboard or screen as a delivery point, it was slipped halfway under my backpack. The streaks were gone. This time there were small smudges, scattered across the paper like fingerprints. Each smudge was oval-shaped, faint but visible. Someone had pressed their fingertips onto the page deliberately, one after the other, like leaving a trail. By then my nerves were fraying. I kept imagining a scenario where someone was watching me the moment I found it, waiting for a reaction. And the worst part was that the smudges were different sizes, like they came from different fingers, maybe even different hands. But the spacing between them felt rhythmic, patterned. I didn't want to understand the pattern. On the fifth day, the paper didn't arrive in the morning. I thought maybe it was over. Maybe whoever had been leaving them was done, or had gotten bored, or realized I wasn't reacting. I almost felt relief. But then during lunch, when I opened my notebook to check something, the sixth sheet fell out. This one was the worst. Not because of the marks, not because of the pattern, but because of where the marks were. Instead of streaks or smudges, the surface had long, thin brush-like swipes across the top margin, layered faintly. And below them, in the bottom right corner, was a shape that was unmistakably the outline of a hand pressed lightly, as if someone had held their palm flat and then lifted it cleanly. No detail, just the outline. I froze staring at it. My hands shook slightly, not from fear of what the marks were made from, but because whoever left them wanted me to see that outline. Wanted me to know they could get close enough to touch my belongings without being caught. Wanted me to feel watched. I didn't finish lunch. I didn't go back to class. I walked to the administration office and asked to see the lab's security footage. The receptionist told me the cameras in that room had been malfunctioning for weeks. My stomach dropped. I didn't tell her why I was asking. That night I locked my bedroom door, even though I'd never locked it before. I kept imagining the pattern of the papers, the progression of the marks. Streaks, shapes, straight line, fingerprints, and finally the hand outline, like someone was getting closer each time, moving from confusion to clarity. The seventh paper appeared the next morning, but not in the lab, and not in my bag. It was taped to my front door. No streaks, no lines, no fingerprints, just one sentence, written with the same dull reddish material. You still haven't understood where the marks come from. And the worst part is that the paper was perfectly clean except for the writing. No damage, no smudges, no stains anywhere else. As if the person who left it had become careful. As if the earlier Messier marks hadn't been accidents. As if they had been practicing, preparing, getting closer. And I still don't know what they want. But every morning since then, before I even step outside, I check the door. Because deep down, I know the next paper is coming. And I'm terrified of what they'll write when they finally decide I'm ready to understand. I don't think I'll ever forget the morning the final paper showed up, because everything about that day felt wrong before I even opened my eyes. You know how sometimes you wake up and something in the air feels heavier than usual, like the room is holding its breath? That's how it was. I remember lying there, staring at the faint outline of my door in the dim light, knowing something waited for me on the other side. The papers had been appearing for a week, each one somehow more deliberate than the last, each one placed somewhere closer to me. At first it was the school computer lab, then my bag, then my front door. The progression didn't feel random. It felt like someone pushing slowly inward, testing boundaries, learning the timing of my day. I didn't sleep much anymore. I flinched at sounds. I double-checked locks. But even with all that, nothing could have prepared me for what came next. I got out of bed slowly, listening. The house was silent. Too silent. Usually my mom rummaged in the kitchen, or my brother played something on his phone. But that morning there was nothing. I opened my door and stepped into the hallway, the stillness amplifying every sound I made. And that's when I saw it. The seventh paper wasn't taped to my front door or left on a desk. It was lying on the floor directly in front of my bedroom, centered perfectly, as if whoever placed it wanted me to find it the second I stepped out. The sheet looked cleaner than all the others. No curled edges, no dust, no creases. Just flat, white, and waiting. I didn't want to pick it up. My hands shook anyway as I reached for it. The paper felt cold, as if it had been outside, even though I knew it hadn't. And across the top third was a series of thin, uneven marks. Not streaks like the first paper, not smudges, not shapes. These marks were short, vertical lines arranged in rows. Some longer, some shorter. They didn't look like handwriting. They looked like tally marks. Dozens of them. At first my brain tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was some kind of texture test, or someone dragging a piece of metal lightly across the page. But the rows were too neatly aligned, too purposeful. And near the bottom of the page, beneath the last row, there was a single line written in the same dull reddish material used on the other papers. Count them. That was it. Just those 2 words. But the moment I saw them, my stomach turned cold. Because the paper wasn't telling me to count the marks. It was telling me to understand something about them. Something I had missed. I sat on the edge of my bed, the paper balanced on my knees, and forced myself to count the marks row by row. There were 71 tallies. Not a round number. Not something symbolic. But when I whispered the final count under my breath, I froze. 71. My homeroom class had 71 students. For a moment I just stared at the number on my phone screen, comparing it to the number of tallies. They matched perfectly. Too perfectly. And the realization hit me. The tallies weren't random. They were representing people. My class. Every single one of us. But why? What was the point? What was I supposed to understand? I felt the pressure behind my eyes that came before panic, but I pressed it down. I needed to stay focused. I examined the marks again, this time more slowly. That's when I noticed something else. 3 of the tallies had faint circles drawn around them. Not deep or dark, barely visible, as if someone had traced them lightly with a fingertip. I counted the positions of the circled tallies. The 12th mark. The 38th mark. The 57th mark. It took me far too long to realize what those numbers represented. Those were the assigned seat numbers in the computer lab. The seating chart posted on the wall listed each computer by number, and numbers 12, 38, and 57 were all in the second row. The same row as mine. Computer 12 was 2 seats to my left. Computer 38 was the one directly behind me. And computer 57 was the one diagonally behind me. All 3 desks were in the cluster near mine. My heart thudded in my throat as the reality sank in. This wasn't random. It wasn't someone being creepy for attention. It was targeted. Someone had been watching who sat near me, who passed behind me, who lingered in that part of the room. Someone who knew the lab layout better than I did. Someone who wanted me to know what they were capable of, without ever touching me. I stared at the paper for a long time. The tallies blurred slightly, but I forced myself to keep looking. And then, almost by accident, I noticed something else. At the very bottom of the page, right near the edge, there was a faint smudge. Not red, not dark, just a pale gray mark, almost invisible. It wasn't a fingerprint, not like the earlier papers. It looked more like a faint transfer, as if the paper had brushed against something chalky. And I recognized the texture. In the computer lab, on the far wall, there was an old corkboard with a chalk border from when the room used to be a part-time classroom. The chalk had long since faded, but if you touched that border you'd still get a faint dusty residue on your hand. The same chalky residue that now marked the bottom edge of the paper. Whoever left the paper had touched that wall. Recently. That meant they'd been in the lab again, after the 6th paper. Maybe even after school yesterday. Maybe even while I was still on campus. A cold feeling spread through my chest, slow and heavy. I held the paper to the light, squinting, searching for anything else I might have missed. That's when I saw it, on the back corner, barely visible unless the angle was perfect. An indentation pressed into the paper. Not ink, not color. Just pressure. The kind left when someone presses down hard while gripping it. A partial imprint of something. Curved. Parallel ridges. The faint outline of the edge of a key. Whoever had placed the papers had been holding a key tightly enough to leave an impression. Not a house key. Not a car key. The shape was too flat, too rectangular. It looked exactly like one of the school's master keys. The same type the lab assistant carried. The same type the custodians used. The same type that fit every door in the academic building. As soon as I saw it, everything fell into place. How the papers got into the lab. Into my bag. Onto my door. In front of my room. Someone with access. Someone who could move without being questioned. Someone who knew schedules, seating charts, building layouts, and the quiet hours when no one was paying attention. I thought back to every day that week. Every face. Every time I felt like someone lingered behind me longer than normal. Every time I sensed eyes on the back of my neck. And suddenly I understood something else. The tallies weren't just representing my class. They were representing everyone the person had access to. Everyone they could reach. Everyone they had already watched. The circled tallies weren't warnings. They were selections. And as the realization settled heavily in my chest, I saw the final detail I somehow missed. At the top left corner, isolated from the rest of the tallies, there was a single short line. A tally set apart. Not part of the 71. Not part of any row. Just one by itself. And under it, written so faintly I had to tilt the page toward the window to see, were 4 words. This one is you. I dropped the paper before I felt it leave my fingers. Because that wasn't a message. It was a final confirmation. The person who left the papers wasn't choosing me.